land title, again, title to the property will be free of all encumbrances, liens, and interest except for, and there's a few items there.
Correct, and that's where you're accepting some things. In terms of it being free, you want to make sure there's enough money to close. So make sure you can pay off all the mortgages, caveats with debts, writs, liens, certificate of lis pendens, anything that's a financial nature that's not allowed to stay on title has to be removed. And if there's not enough money, it's not going to close.
Now, that does happen in that people have a house for sale, they have a very high mortgage on that property, and so basically whatever the agreed upon purchase price is, it could be not enough
Correct.
to pay off their debts, the mortgage,
yes,
whatever. They then are responsible for making up that difference, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And not just the mortgage amount, because there's also a payout penalty, and those can be $40,000, $50,000. So you want to make sure that there's a total amount either from the sale of the property or from other resources to be able to discharge everything on title.
And again, that's where the real estate agent, the realtor, comes into account to make sure that all that is properly explained.
That's right.
At that point, Jeff, if there are any questions, can the seller, can the buyer, can they come to you or a real estate lawyer to get advice on any of this stuff prior to moving forward?
Absolutely, and we don't even charge for it because it makes the whole process easier for our clients and it's a better experience for them. So if they have questions, even an email or quick phone call, usually we're talking about 5 or 10 minutes to explain what needs to be explained. And it saves all kinds of issues then kind of going through it, signing off on it, and then trying to find out solutions to it. We even have it, and we think it's so important, an 800 number for after hours for realtors and mortgage professionals so that if something comes up, they can get the legal advice they need, even if it's a Sunday afternoon. So we try and operate that way.
Oh, that's awesome. Representations and warranties, and this seems to be pretty straightforward.
Seems to be, but there are problems all the time. So, and these are really important for a seller, that they understand what it is that they're promising, because if they can't deliver, there's going to be problems. So making sure that your property, nothing encroaches on the neighboring property. Make sure everything's on the property. If someone is not Canadian resident for tax purposes, there's going to be a withholding tax and they have to get a clearance certificate from the CRA. There's a number of things that they have to do. Making sure that there's not a breach of a restrictive covenant or anything else on title. These are all things that a person should go through, make sure that they're able to say, yes, I can represent that and warrant that, because they're on the hook if they don't.
All right. Let's go to next area here, dower. You talked a little bit about that. Conditions, you've got your typical conditions here, your financing, property inspection, sale of buyer's property. You can basically have any kind of condition in here, and I think it's important for people to understand the difference between a term and a condition.
Absolutely, and we see these messed up all the time. So a term is something that a buyer or seller has to do or gets. It's a part of the agreement, whereas a condition is something that the entire contract is conditional on that condition being waived. So if the condition is not waived, no deal, everybody goes back to their respective positions,
right,
and there's no negative consequence for anyone. So if there's something that is really important for a buyer, that it's important to them that they can build a garage, so they might have a condition on confirming that they can build a garage at the back of the house or in the front of the house. A seller, if they're not sure if they can convey a property until they find out if someone will agree to sign, or if they have dower rights waived, or probate has to go through, they can put a seller condition to make sure that the sale they won't get sued, because everyone goes back to the original position if they don't waive that condition.
Typically, do conditions have to have a deadline or a penalty if it doesn't happen?
Well, there's not a penalty because everyone goes back to the original position, but there should be a deadline, and those are firm. If a deadline is not made, then there is no deal. Everything's done. If the condition is not waived.
Right.
And on the pre-printed conditions, there's some blanks. Those all have to be filled in. Don't leave something empty. So for instance, on financing, it's very important that you know what interest rate you're going to be comfortable with, or which, how long of a mortgage is going to be in there, and that you put in that number.
Sure,
so,
like usually like 80%
right,
financing or something along
So if you're relying on only having 5% financing and it's left blank, then you might be required to get a mortgage where you put down 20%. And if you don't have it, there's a problem.
Okay, interesting. Next one, attachments and additional terms. So we can go through all of these things, a financing schedule, a tenancy schedule. This is very important for people who are selling a home that they may be renting out.
Right, so you want to make sure that everyone is on the same page and they know what they're getting in terms of tenants and leases and whatnot.
All right. Closing process. And I'm guessing that there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong here.
Yeah, and the one thing that comes up most frequently is a seller's inability to provide a real property report with compliance. The real property report is a survey. It shows the property lines, fences, decks, garages, all the structures on the property. And the problems come up when something's missing, so they've built a garage and it hasn't been updated,
Right.
They built a fence, it hasn't been updated, or when something encroaches, so part of a building goes onto the neighboring property or onto the city's property, and all those things should be dealt with right away, even before the property is listed, ideally, or as soon as it's listed, when the real estate agent gets involved with things.
What if we have a situation where a seller has a real property report that hasn't been updated for decades, but the original one was with compliance? How does that work out? How does that roll out?
So a real property report doesn't expire, and sometimes we have people who are updating them when they don't have to. As long as the real property report shows all the current structures, so there's been no additional decks or air conditioning units or garages or anything like that, where it shows what's on the property.
And it hasn't changed.
And it hasn't changed, and it's a real property report, not a surveyor certificate, so an RPR,
Right.
Then we're okay to use it, and it has the stamp of compliance.
Now, just prior to our little meeting here, I was discussing a real property report, did have a municipal compliance stamp from 1997, but at that time it also showed there was an encroachment of a retaining wall.
And that's the representation and warranty that there are no structures that encroach onto other properties.
That's part of the new contract, the new purchase agreement.
That's always been part of it, which is the interesting thing. The new contract allows a buyer to have really strong rights with good teeth that basically they can walk away from the deal, they can take possession, live in the house, and not pay a penny until a real property report showing that there are no encroachments is there. And that was the change, is that the requirement to have a real property report, not just with compliance, but also that demonstrates the validity of the representations and the warranties.
Current conditions.
Current conditions.
Current protocols, right.
Yes.
And that's important to notice.
Very important.
All right. Jeff, the last couple of pages, you've got insurance on here, remedies, notice, and I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff to go through. Basically, when you are going through these, and we've talked about some of the issues, when you have an issue that crops up with the seller or buyer that you're sitting down with, and something comes up, how is it addressed?
Right away. So
You're on the phone to the other lawyer?
we're on the phone with the other lawyer. Often we try and get in as quick as we can in terms of when things are identified as a problem.
Sure.
And most of the time things can be worked out, and that's the nice thing about what we do. As long as you keep a level head, there are some people that are harder to deal with, and my experience is if you say, hey, do you want to go for some chicken wings and just get to know each other on a personal basis a little bit,
Right.
You can build good relationships with other people in the industry, and it just makes it makes it more personal, and you can just work through what is the best solution for our clients.